everyone, my name is Rochelle Innocent and I'm the founder and CEO of Project Purpose. Welcome to our channel. Our community is focused on fostering the intellectual and character development in children. We do this through our parent-child workshops that are focused on 4 themes: autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept, in order to cultivate grit, perseverance, and resilience in each child. And we are so thrilled to be offering one of the first of its kind, digital, virtual, and continuous learning environments, enabling parents and children to connect from all around the world. At Project Purpose, our overarching mandate is to renew and rebuild family, community, and relationships. Our different social media platforms provide us with an opportunity to have discussions and to create space for all topics that relate to family, community, and relationships with ourselves as well as with others, with a primary focus on mental health and education. More precisely, the ways that the institutions of mental health and education play a role and have played a role in our societies at large. These discussions and debates provide us with an opportunity to think critically about what needs to change within these structures for us to live up to our bold slogan: support, protect, and empower each child through youth-focused development, better known as leadership in juvenescence. We recognize that in valuing our children's leadership potential, this also translates as recreating and co-creating environments, both socially and politically, that will enable our children to thrive. For those of you who are particularly keen on the topic, we also write thought pieces every other Monday. We actually have a thought piece scheduled to drop this upcoming Monday, so definitely be sure to meander over to the website and check out our online content. Now, if it is the case that you are looking for a listening alternative, well, we're available wherever podcasts are playing, and we provided you with access to a few links down below. Now, as is the convention, be sure to subscribe, hit that post notification bell so that you are aware of every time we post. And of course, if you like these conversations and you want to keep them going, like, comment, and share this segment. Let's get into it. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today's topic of discussion is mental wellness. On the conversation on mental wellness this week, I'm going to be talking about living your authentic truth. But more specifically, because that's a very broad topic that can be parsed into very many different themes, I want to talk about the 3 Ds of authenticity. I think that this is really important because for those of us who want to be authentic, sometimes there are certain behaviors and tendencies that we engage in, specifically around agreeability, that make it very hard for us to show up authentically and to do so unapologetically. And so I think those are 2 elements that are part of our growth journey that give us the freedom to be, the freedom to express, and to behave in ways that align to our highest selves, of course, but also in a way where we feel like the things that we're saying are aligned to the things that we believe, the things that we value, and the things that we want to make happen in this life. And so without further preamble, I want to talk about my 3 Ds of authenticity. And so these are behaviors, these are muscles that rub against the grain, and they play into authenticity, but they require a little bit of unpacking, some deconstructing, and then we reconstruct the ability to do things in ways that, again, we're still aligned to our higher selves. We're not being mean by any means, but we're being authentic, we're being truthful, we're being factual, and we're being open and honest about what we believe and how we position ourselves in specific topics. And so with that said, I'm going to go into my first D of authenticity, and that D is about disagreement. I think that it's very hard for you to be authentic if you struggle to disagree with people, and I think that disagreement can happen in so many different ways. There are so many different styles of disagreement, but if you're someone who just cannot disagree, even if you fundamentally believe that what that person or what an individual is stating is very much against what you personally believe, then it's going to give you a hard time in living in your authenticity. And so I have different ways that I disagree. I'm not always going to disagree in a very blunt, direct way. Most of the time my disagreement is going to be passive disengagement. And so I have perfected the passive disengagement. Typically, if I'm disagreeing but I don't want to have a conversation about it, like I don't want to get into it, it's not going to be a debate, it's not going to be kind of a battle of the wills, then I'm going to say that's interesting, and then I'm going to walk away. And me saying that that's interesting is me providing validation that I've heard the person, but no validation that I agree. And I'm not ever never going to be the kind of human who is going to say, I'm not going to utter the words I agree if I disagree. But if I don't want to have a conversation around a disagreement, if the way that you position your belief is just something that I want to mental note and I'm going to keep it in the back of my mind for the next time that I engage with someone, then I'm just going to respond with, that's interesting. And so me saying that's interesting is a way that I passively disengage with a conversation that I disagree with, because I don't always think that authenticity is about being loud or about being bold or about being abrasive. And I think sometimes we think about authenticity and we have some of these negative connotations that aren't real. It's about being in alignment. And so I think being in alignment is just about how I personally feel about a given situation and how I feel translates in the ways that I show up. And so sometimes I will outwardly speak up and be like, hey, this is why I disagree and this is my position as to why. But I need to be in front of a specific kind of human, a specific kind of thinker for me to want to engage in a conversation around disagreement. Not everyone can have civilized conversations around disagreements, and I'm the kind of human where I'm not interested in having uncivilized conversations around disagreement. But passive disengagement, I think, is a great tool that you want to leverage so that you can still be authentic when you're navigating in circles where you're not necessarily being met with beliefs that align to your own. And so disagreement is definitely one of my first D's of authenticity. And so how that translates again is for you to determine, is for you to decide whatever feels aligned to you. And as you grow and develop, that alignment is going to look and shift and feel differently. But as long as you're disagreeing in your own way, as long as you feel authentic in the way that you're communicating that disagreement, then you're on the right track. And so the next D of authenticity that I want to talk about is the one that I kind of referenced subtly in my first one, which is disengagement. I think we don't have to always find a way to build a bridge with everybody. I think sometimes our stages and phases require that we recognize, hey, like we've outgrown certain friendships, outgrown certain circles, outgrown certain communities. And so I am very comfortable disengaging when I recognize that my beliefs, my values, what I stand for is fundamentally different from that of those or the individuals that I have built community with in the past, or that I was trying to build community with, but now that I really understand what's going on, I'm like, oh well, wait, this is a compatibility issue. And so I think that it's really important that we all recognize, like, when it's time to say thank you, but no thank you. Like, this is not my cup of tea. This is not for me. And I think too often we're trying so hard to just make ourselves fit into every circle, every space, at every table, that we lose ourselves in the process. And I think for me, what was a big moment for me as it relates to this, one of my biggest pivotal moments, and I guess I'll get anecdotal here, is in university. I grew up in a small little booty town, and I had friends who didn't look like me, right? I didn't grow up in a super diverse neighborhood, but I grew up with people who saw me for who I was. I was never expected to be anyone other than Rochelle. I was never held to stereotypes or beliefs around how I was supposed to show up. Like, those were just things that, because I grew up with these individuals, like, they just knew me as Rochelle. And when I was figuring out what my identity was, when I was trying out different styles of communication or different ways of being in high school, like anytime I tried to step into like a stereotypical archetype, my friends would call me out on it. And these were my friends who, again, were from various different backgrounds, but all of us were from a tiny little town. And so I remember in university, I felt super excited about the opportunity to be in proximity with people who had the same cultural background as my parents, who had the same cultural background as some of my family members who lived in a different province than I did. And I thought that maybe I could learn a little bit more about myself in having proximity with these individuals. But I quickly learned that some of the values, some of the beliefs that were being circulated, and specifically to these clubs that I was interested in at my university, they just did not align with my personal values. They made me feel like I had to turn away from the friendships and the relationships that I had built up until that point in order to embrace this identity that was still very foreign and very novel to me. And it wasn't my identity. It wasn't who I was. It was stepping into what I felt was an archetype of an identity that was foreign. And so because of that, I decided to disengage. I decided that those weren't necessarily communities or clubs that I wanted to join when it involved me erasing my individuality. And that's kind of what I felt like. I felt like certain people who really tie identity to cultural backgrounds or to race or to gender, for me, that it feels a little bit like identity erasure. If there are certain things that you hold true to your individuality that might rub against the grain of those specific collective identities. And so because I was always very strong in my personal identity, I didn't grow up in an environment where I had a lot of affinity to gender identity. Like those weren't really conversations that were had. It was just kind of assumed. There wasn't a lot of fluidity or complexity when it came to gender in the times that I grew up in. And when I think about racial background, like there was very little conversations that I had in my household about racial background. I didn't have a lot of issues as it relates to navigating race growing up. It wasn't tied to my race necessarily, or didn't feel like that. It was mostly tied to who I was and how I showed up as an individual. And so I was always curious about racial identity, but when I recognized that there are some elements of racial identity that rust against my own personal sense of individuality, then I just didn't care to partake in it. I didn't want to erase the personal, the individual for the collective. And so I decided to disengage. And I think that it's really important that for those of us who are navigating these collective identities that revolve around race, that revolve around gender, that revolve around sexuality, that we don't buy in so much to this collective definition that it erases part of who we are as individuals, because we can have our own definition of what race means to us that doesn't align to what race means to the collective or to the whole. And that's okay, because we are our own personal representations of everything that we show up as. And I think that it's really important that we hold true to our individuality, to our authenticity, so that people recognize that there are people who exist beyond these collective definitions that get thrown around and talked about. And not to say that those people are anomalies, but it creates the nuance that people need to understand exists when they think about identity. Identity cannot be something that you typecast, and I think a lot of the times when we have collective identities, those are typecasted. There's a lot of stereotypes and assumptions that play into those that, again, I think are a threat to individuality, and I am fundamentally an individualist, which is why I'm here talking about authenticity. So that's my D. I think I really went down a rabbit hole there, and I don't really talk about prickly topics like race and gender on my channel. I like to try to keep it a little bit more neutral, but I wanted to have that conversation here because part of my authenticity journey was actually deciding, like, where do I sit on this spectrum of identity when it comes to gender, when it comes to race, when it comes to sexuality, when there's so much that people wanted me to adopt that I just didn't feel personally was mine to adopt, or that was so personal to me that I didn't really hear communicated in the circles and in the conversations that talked about these specific identities. And so because of that, I am very much my own person. I have my own personal definitions and my own personal values and beliefs around how I engage around race and how I engage around gender and how I engage around sexuality that are very different from what some of the mainstream or even counter mainstream topics speak to. And I'm confident in that. I have no issues with the way that I personally identify and with how I categorize and prioritize those specific identities. Like, it's not who I am. I don't think that race and gender is who I am. I don't identify it with those things very strongly. Like, there are parts of like how I show up for sure, but like my individuality is a lot more personal than things as broad and as constructed socially as race, gender, and sexuality. Those are not topics that you're going to hear me be loud and proud about, because I'm just super nuanced in how I see them and how I personally identify with them. So that's the long and short of it. I think I could probably get into a deeper topic on it. I feel uncomfortable actually talking about prickly topics because I know that my perspective is different from the mainstream and from the counterstream, but I don't want to create waves unnecessarily because my views are very different. But I think maybe this is an opportunity in 2025 for me to get a little bit more personal and delve a little bit more deeply into some of those prickly topics that I typically stay away from. So that's me sort of breaking the surface of that conversation here right now. And so all of that to say, my last D of authenticity, my last D is deliberate. It's being deliberate. And I think this is really important because I think authenticity is about intentionality. It takes, in an environment, in a culture, in a society where there's just so much put in front of us that enables conformity, you have to be very deliberate in how you navigate and how you have conversations and in how you show up for you to be authentic. It's not easy, actually. It's quite difficult, and there's a lot of resistance that takes place when you break from the mold. And I think that deliberation, like being deliberate in how you show up and where you show up and in why you show up in specific places, I think is going to make sure that you manage your energy accordingly, because it can be a lot of energy up front living authentically. So I think being mindful, being very intentional about the conversations that you play into and that you don't is important, because for me, being authentic isn't about being loud about it. Like, being authentic is about just being comfortable in my own skin, being comfortable in my individuality, and also being comfortable not needing to defend who I am in my own skin and my individuality. I don't feel the need to defend how I identify. I don't need need to have those conversations. I don't need to have shouting matches. I'm comfortable in who I am. And so because of that, I'm very deliberate in how I expend my energy when it comes to ways that I show up authentically. I don't think that it needs to be something that I need to showcase. It's not a revolution. I think it's something that is quietly understood, and I've reached that point. I think that it's really important that we get to a place where our sense of authenticity isn't so under threat that we constantly feel the need to be vocal about it. I think authenticity is a very quiet, powerful presence that you cultivate with deeper understanding of self. In any case, that was what I wanted to talk about, some food for thought for you, a little bit deeper than what our typical mental wellness conversations are typically like, but I think that's what I want. That's why I wanted this to be a bit of a brain teaser for you, a mind teaser, as you think about authenticity and how you want to show up authentically, and some of the muscles that you need to develop that break against the mold, that break from being agreeable and break from conformity, so that you can show up as authentically as you want to and as authentically as you need to if you're focused on this journey of inner alignment and self-discovery. And again, if you are focused on this conversation, on this alignment with self and on mastery and self-discovery, we do host live events on our website, so I definitely want you to check that out. We built a roadmap for the rest of 25. See what topics interest you and definitely join in. And so all of that to say, thank you so much again for tuning in and for giving us an opportunity to play a small role in your journey. We really appreciate the time and attention. And for those of you who are tuning in because you want to get a sense as to what's going on with my stalking situation, no information for you as yet, but you will be the first to know when I do. Thank you so much again, and we'll talk to you all very soon.